Hello and happy Pride. I am Stephen Sawyer, the Executive Director of COCAN in Seattle and a charter member of the Washington State LGBTQ Commission under Governor Jay Inslee's administration. Every year in June, Pride is held to commemorate a critical Stonewall riots of 1969, a series of demonstrations held in resistance to police brutality at Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in Greenwich Village. This rebellion was led by many Black, trans, and queer activists, including Marsha P. Johnson, the mother of the LGBTQ plus civil rights movement. She is noted to having thrown the first brick of rebellion that marks the turning point for the fight for gay liberation. We owe a debt of gratitude to such noted activists as Audre Lorde, James Baldwin, Bayard Rustin, and many others who've stood firmly aside both the Black and the LGBTQ plus movements for liberation. We've learned from them, then and now, that there can be no pride without racial justice for all. This year's Pride celebration calls for a return of those radical roots and to be truly intersectional and to display solidarity with the current Black Lives Matter movement. For me, Pride has always been about celebrating our accomplishments, creating a space where people can unapologetically be themselves. It's about uniting and equipping our community to fight the isms and the phobias of the world, such as sexism, racism, misogyny, ableism, transphobia, homophobia, and anti-Blackness. And yes, I say racism and anti-Blackness because the two are not the same. Racism is this man-made belief or doctrine that there is an inherent difference among various racial groups, whereby one is deemed better than the other. It includes systems and policies that are often weaved into every part of our lives here in the US and in many places around the world. When we think of racism today, most of us think of systematic racism. But the idea of anti-Blackness can be even more devastating. You see, anti-Blackness is just as harmful in most, and it's more than just radical racism against Black people. When we think of it in this way, we can oversimplify it and remove its fangs. It's a vague idea. It's a plan that enforces society's inability to recognize my humanity. It's a consciousness that feeds contempt, neglect, and disgust from my culture and my experience. It's a resistance, an oppressing position toward all Black people, our values, and our objectives, often masked in statements like, "But I was raised not to see color." But not seeing color is not seeing me. And that idea feeds an anti-Black perspective. The African American Studies professor Frank Wilderson says that anti-Blackness describes the inability to recognize Black humanity. It captures the reality that the kind of violence that is vacillating and demonstrated in Black life is not based on any specific thing a Black person does or did. The violence we experience is tied to, and is not tied to any particular transgression. It is an unjustified and unrelenting belief that just because we are Black, we must suffer these indifferences. As a Black man and as a same gender loving person or a queer person, I would say that most and foremost Black people, Pride is about being a part of a transformative protest against this same anti-Blackness. It's about a celebration of our culture and our uniqueness, our diversity, and then our queerness. It's a chance for us to stand with our voices united against injustice and to share that we believe what we to believe to be right and just in a way that feels right to us. Pride was born out of an uprising, a protest, a riot. Pride, too, was about fighting systematic police brutality in a time when community said enough is enough and we won't take it anymore. And while this year's parades, parties, and festivities might not be going on as usual, Pride cannot and should not be canceled because Pride is being called on to return to its fundamental principles, to fight injustice, and to give voice to those who have been overlooked for far too long. When I think about this moment, and I think about this movement happening in the country right now, I think about the fight against a pervasive system of mass incorporation, fueled by the unequal application of law and punishment perpetrated here in the United States. And I think about a phrase from a speech delivered by Frederick Douglass 160 years ago. At a time like this, scorching irony is not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability, I could reach the nation's ear. I would today pour out a fiery storm of biting ridicule, blushing reproach, withering scorn, and stern rebuke. It is not light that we need, but fire. It is not gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of this nation must be quickened, and the conscience of this nation must be roused. The prosperity of this nation must be startled, and the hypocrisy of this nation must be exposed. And it's a crime against God and man, and it must be proclaimed and denounced. It's sad that today these words still ring true and have meaning. It's sad that in our country, the labels itself as the home of the free, the land of the free and the home of the brave, that 160 years later, we still have public lynchings in Black communities in the streets of this country. It's time for a change, and it's time for Pride to rise up and to be the example of light and love that the world needs to see. It's time for Pride to be the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake of change. This year, Pride has to be different in the light of these brutal murders: George Floyd, Tony McDade, Ahmaud Arbery, Nia Pope, Sean Reed, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. Their tragic murders have led to an eruption of transformative protest against racial injustice and anti-Blackness across the US and around the world. We speak their names and we seek real justice for our brothers and sisters who have been slain by a people empowered by a system of oppression. We can and should stand in solidarity with this moment for Black lives as they advance the struggle for equality, justice, and positive change, because we can relate to the pain and to the anger. As we remember the Stonewall Rebellion, remember, Stonewall was an uprising. Stonewall was a riot. Stonewall stood as a watershed moment in LGBTQ plus history and a catalyst for the gay rights movement. As queer people, riots and protests have often been among our most powerful tools to create change. So, we stand firm in our resolve to dismantle hatred and biases that have created a culture where Black lives are not valued or protected. We stand firm for LGBTQ plus rights and for Black lives. Guided by the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, sent to us from a letter from the Birmingham jail after a riot much like what's taking place today. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. We must find justice for those brutally taken from us by the hands of rogue police, of racial individuals or racist individuals, and a broken system. Because what is done to one of us can be done to all of us. So, this pride, as we step away from the commercial side and we go back to the roots of pride, we should remember that we are indebted to those Black and Latino trans activists who paved the way for the day's LGBTQ plus pride celebrations. We must recognize that we have not done enough to protect the trans community, Black trans women, and Black lives in general. What will you do to amplify the voices for those oppressed, murdered, and killed before our eyes? Today, this country and the world has a real opportunity for change. We hold fast to these genuine principles and precepts of pride. Will we utilize our great power as we have obtained to help make lives more just and equitable for the world? As we show support to the Black LGBTQ community, let's help Black queer communities build infrastructures and systems that are culturally sensitive and aware, and that help develop an equitable playing field for us all. This week, on the cover of a New York magazine, I witnessed a picture that incorporated imagery that related Black Lives Matter to pride. This artwork acknowledged the fact that the two movements are intertwined. It takes a bold stand and recognizes and expresses the fact that many members of our community, the LGBTQ community, and populations like it, are further marginalized by race and gender identities. That is why we cannot stop fighting. We cannot stop working. We are still fighting for our voices today. And that is why we must stand up this pride and say, Black lives do matter. Join in, participate. Your voice, lend your voice to this message. And yes, remember, the revolution shall be televised. Thank you and happy Pride.